Tonight's big stories. The United States Coast Guard commits to deploying more resources to the West Philippine Sea to assist the Philippines, while ASEAN Coast Guard leaders gather for a security forum on Samal Island, Davao del Norte.
After today's executive session, Senator Risa Hontiveros says they're even more convinced that not only is Mayor Alice Guo involved in POGO operations, but that she's also not a real Filipino citizen.
And on the economy, inflation accelerates for a fourth straight month in May to 3.9%, sparked by faster price increases in electricity, water, housing, and fuel.
Good evening, welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
The United States Coast Guard has promised to send more assets to the West Philippine Sea to support Manila in upholding sovereign rights in its exclusive economic zone.
This comes after the Philippines asked its Japanese and American counterparts to boost their presence in the area amid what is deemed as a forthcoming threat from China.
Meanwhile, ASEAN Coast Guard leaders met starting today for a 3-day maritime law enforcement forum in Davao City. Bril Montalvo with tonight's big story.
Expect more assets from the United States to cover the West Philippine Sea. The U.S. Coast Guard, or USCG, has promised to deploy its ship to the area to support the Philippines in upholding its sovereign rights in disputed waters. According to the Philippine Coast Guard, the Americans will deploy their North Pacific Coast Guard. PCG Admiral Ronnie Hill Gavan had asked for greater deployment in the vast ocean to address imminent threats, particularly after China laid down new regulations which includes arresting foreigners that it deems trespassing. This proposal was made not only to the USCG but also to the Japan Coast Guard during last week's Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The PCG, JCG, and USCG have since agreed to pursue capacity-building initiatives to strengthen their people-to-people relationship, better synchronize Coast Guard doctrines on the grounds, and develop trust with each other. Along with this, ASEAN Coast Guard leaders gathered earlier today to discuss security issues concerning their respective maritime territories at the ASEAN Forum held on Samal Island, Davao del Norte. The forum is meant to address safety and security issues in the disputed territories of the West Philippine Sea. During the press conference, Gavan said that the objectives of the gathering is to promote a safe, open, and secure global maritime domain. He emphasized that their duty is to save lives and protect the ships navigating the seas. In response to the recent issue where China accused Filipino troops of pointing guns at them, Gavan had this to say.
So we use our firearms only to protect ourselves and in certain cases to effect compliance to rules. But for most it is to protect ourselves. Those are more self-defense tools. And foremost, we are a humanitarian service, so we don't hurt anyone.
Solicitor General Menardo Guevara was also there. He said the country's current policy aims to ease the escalating tensions between China and the Philippines over the disputed territory in the West Philippine Sea.
The government has always adopted the policy of trying to de-escalate this tension by all available diplomatic means.
Guevara also emphasized that the government is prepared to seek alternative solutions outside of diplomacy to prevent the situation from escalating into conflict.
We do not foreclose the possibility that if this situation worsens, and we do not get the result that we desire, then we will have to explore other options than diplomatic. So for now, we are not making any public announcements as to what these options are.
For News 5, Bril Montalvo, we are One News.
Okay, let's get more details on this and insights on this with our first guest tonight. We have maritime security expert Ray Powell. Ray is the director of Sea Light at Stanford University's Gordon Knott Center for National Security Innovation and is normally based in California, but we have the privilege of having him in studio tonight. Thanks for being here, Ray.
Good evening.
Braving the traffic in Manila.
Well, yeah, it actually took us longer to get here than I expected.
Well, it was a very rainy day,
It
so
was.
you have to excuse that.
You came from the Shangri-La Dialogue.
I did, yes. Yeah, I was there last week.
Okay, I wanted to start from a bird's eye view. There's lots to talk about with you. And that is that, first of all, Sea Light, for those who don't know,
Yeah.
is part of, as I just said, is part of the Gordon Knott Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University.
Yep.
And what you do is you do monitor maritime activity in this region.
Yes.
What has the data told you about China's strategy and actions of late in the disputed waters, particularly Second Thomas Shoal, where a lot of the run-ins have happened?
Yeah.
What is it telling you?
It tells me that, first of all, it's escalating, and second, it is moving closer to the Philippines. So escalating what we see around Scarborough Shoal now, what we see around Ayungin Shoal, what we see, and now, as I say, it's moving eastward, it's moving closer to Sabina Shoal. So now there is much more Chinese activity at Sabina Shoal than before. So I think at this point what we can say is that China still believes that its best course of action is to try to escalate the Philippines off of its stance.
When you say more activity, are we also talking more presence here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
More boats.
Yes.
Both from the
More-
PLA Navy, both from the Chinese Coast Guard, and as well as militia
All of the
vessels.
above.
All of the
Yes.
above. And when you say there's more activity, can you put into perspective, like how many exactly, how much of an increase, and when did you note, because these are all satellite images,
Yeah.
and that's how you're monitoring these ships. And can you tell us at which point you started noticing that more and more ships were coming?
So I would go all the way back to last summer.
Sure.
Because that's when I saw China begin to push a lot more, especially of the maritime militia, down into the Spratly Archipelago. And I think it was in response to much of what the Philippines was doing in terms of when it was resupplying and also trying to show the world what was happening during these resupplies. And so the 5th of August, during that particular resupply, that was the first time that the water cannon was used against a resupply mission. And that was after China had already pushed a lot of those ships down into the southern part of the West Philippine Sea. But then recently, I've seen the escalation, first of all, I'd say within the last month and a half or so, the escalation by Scarborough Shoal, and then even more recently by Sabina Shoal.
On the regular, is there a number of, do you have a range?
Yeah.
Of number
So
of
it's always
ships?
a little difficult to count because not all ships broadcast, the automatic information system broadcasts that they're supposed to,
Yes.
and then some are actually of a size that they don't have to, so they don't. So this makes it a little tough. At any given time, I would say up at Scarborough Shoal, we're probably upwards of, say, 10 to a dozen ships patrolling between, and right now it's even elevated more because we just started a major rotation. So usually what happens is additional ships come in, they overlap for a few days, and then some go home. And so I think we're right in the middle of one of those. Sabina Shoal is an interesting case because traditionally China has posted numbers of what we call rafted vessels. So they tie themselves together, and these vessels are they're fishing boats, but they never fish. They receive subsidies from the government of China to just stay in the Spratly Archipelago. They're called fuel subsidies, but if you don't go anywhere, you don't use fuel.
Can you also monitor that, the activities?
You need satellites for that, satellite imagery. So yes, but you have to sort of get them at the right time, and you have to get the right
Daytime,
kind
of
of
course.
conditions.
But again, this does not include the ones that are dark.
So the ones that are dark you can get overhead. So in other words, the picture doesn't lie. But if they're dark, you can't get them moving around broadcasting the AIS.
You can't track
signal.
Around the
their
Ayungin.
path.
Around the Ayungin, how many?
That varies. So I think the last that I saw, there were maybe half a dozen that were on AIS. But
Chinese Maritime Militia or Coast Guard? Or Navy?
both. Mostly I see the militia. Many of the Coast Guard run dark. And then, but a couple of days ago, that surged to, I would say, more like 15 to 18 of the militia, because China believed that the Philippines was about to try a resupply mission. They were trying to stop it. They seem to have believed that incorrectly. So now some of those have gone back
How
again.
do you know this part? How do you know that that's what they're thinking?
Because so they have mouthpieces on the internet that speculate. And so for one of these is called the South China Sea Probing Initiative. It's a think tank out of China. And they will put out messages, and they actually did put out a message saying, it seems that the Philippines is preparing to make a resupply mission.
Okay.
But I saw no Philippine Coast Guard ships moving. I saw nothing moving. And so nothing ever occurred that they seemed to be prepared for. So it seems that they were wrong. So they had some information, but not enough information.
When did you start tracking all of these movements? In what year?
It was late 2022 that I started. It was early 2023 when I started making some of my findings public. And interestingly, it was right about the same time that the Philippine government decided to begin publicizing what was happening. So,
AKA the transparency initiative of
Yes.
the government,
Yes.
posting videos, taking journalists
Yes.
on board, etc.,
Yes.
including Gretchen, of course. But let me just bring it a little bit towards Sabina Shoal. As we know, there have been all these activities out there, and the last one, the Coast Guard noticed crushed corals
Yes.
over at the Sabina Shoal. Have you noted any sort of increased movement around that shoal that could kind of give credence to what the PCG and marine biologists suspect that it could have been dumped? Because right now they're not sure. It could have been global warming and a host of other natural things.
right. So, no. The short answer is no. But that's not surprising. In other words, that doesn't really tell you very much, because if a vessel was going there to dump dried coral in that place, it would not broadcast it would be dark, right? So, and it would probably also know that there were certain times of day when you wouldn't necessarily want to be out in the open so that a satellite can take your picture. So it does. So I don't know that that means anything. It just means that we don't have anything yet.
Okay.
Just to put that into context as well, Sabina or Escota Shoal is just 75 nautical miles
Yes.
off the coast of Palawan.
Yes.
Right.
And
This
so
is why they're quite worried about that area.
It is the closest major feature to Palawan.
Right. Right. What sort of activity are you tracking there? Because all the attention has so far been on Second Thomas
Right.
and Scarborough.
Yeah. So, in the middle of last month, BRP Teresa Magbanwa, one of the Philippines' two 97-meter Coast Guard vessels, the largest, the most modern the Philippines has, deployed out to Escota Shoal
Correct.
and began to keep an eye on what China was doing there. They were concerned about this,
Correct.
this reports of the dumped coral and whether China was making sort of preliminary steps toward some kind of reclamation. And so it has been there ever since. And in fact, they just posted pictures of a change of command that happens that happened there, which indicates it's not planning to leave anytime soon. At that point, the Chinese presence expanded from just those rafted vessels that sit there and don't do very much to the active maritime militia, usually two at a time, and at least one China Coast Guard vessel. And those vessels have harassed Teresa Magbanwa pretty regularly, oftentimes going as close as 50 meters passes by it in different directions. So they're trying to send a message that they're not very happy that it's there.
That's beginning of this year.
It's actually since mid-April.
Since mid-April.
Yep.
Okay.
Are these vessels mostly around the contested areas? Or what is the scope of what you're able to track? Is it the whole South China Sea? Are you also tracking other oceans?
So I focus mostly on the South China Sea, in part because that's where my interest lies, in part because that's where my expertise lies. I do occasionally look at things happening up around Taiwan and in other places that I think that deserve my attention, but my expertise
You
is
like
less
the
in
easy
those-
regions, don't you?
What's that?
You like the conflict-free regions, the easy places.
Well, so I mean, what drove me into this, right? What drove me into this was looking at this problem of gray zone aggression and not seeing a lot of good answers coming from the United States or the West or the, other places as to how do you push back? How do you, and one of the conclusions we came up with at Sea Light was, this is going to sound really profound.
Go ahead.
Gray zone actors thrive in the gray zone because the zone is gray. If you can turn on the
makes sense.
lights, if you can turn on the lights, that changes the game.
Just Sea Light.
Sea Light, that's exactly where it came from. Yep.
So Sea Light was formed and inspired because of what China's been doing. Is that
Well,
correct?
Because of what China's been doing and the fact that they've been so successful when nobody talks about what they're doing, right? So as long as things are quiet, they can keep taking. We often will refer to this as salami slicing. You take a little slice and another little slice and another little slice, and as long
Before
as
you know it, it's gone.
right. Exactly.
We referred to your work several times already on the show. We actually use your data. But we have to bring up some questions that have been thrown at you.
Please.
And your interest in studying the South China Sea. One of which is you spent a 35-year career in the U.S. Air Force.
I did.
And there are speculations that Sea Light and Project Mushu is actually U.S. government funded, that it is related to the U.S. Naval Institute Maritime Counterinsurgency Project, and that your research, as they claim, attempts to incite public opinion and push for governments of countries in the South China Sea to become hard on them. I mean,
Okay, I can unpack that for you. Okay, so yes, I worked for the Air Force for 35 years. I draw a pension from the Air Force because I, retired from the Air Force. So I do get government money in that sense, but I would get it regardless of what if I was handing out shopping carts at Walmart, I would still get that money. My project actually is unfunded. We get a lot of help from organizations that do, so for example, we have an arrangement with a very interesting satellite imagery company called Sky-Fi, which gives us some free access to satellite imagery in places where they would like to sort of demonstrate that they can deliver very good satellite imagery at cost to people. So we get, we have arrangements with different companies. We also have a relationship with Stanford through which we can get some other satellite imagery. The Gordian Knot Center does, or has in the past, received money from the U.S. government. And they're correct when they talk about the Office of Naval Research. It's on the website, right? Unfortunately, the Sea Light has got none of that. It's not that I would not turn it down if they gave it to me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using money to expand our operations. At present, however, we are almost entirely unfunded. I volunteer my time. Sometimes when I'm able to travel, I travel on other people's dime, other people's, in order to sort of give a talk or something like that, but not because Sea Light gives me.
But your website says that you also use commercially available technology.
Yes.
Which means our government has the capacity to obtain it also.
Is it
So do we
similar
have-
to, for example, Ray, planes, you're in the Air Force. I use Flight Radar 24 to track my flights, to track my loved one's flight, so I know if it's on time, if it's coming, if I need to go to the airport early, if I can be a bit more late.
Right.
Is
So
it kind of the
open
same thing
source,
for boats? Yeah, it's just...
So that
it-
technology exists for ships. Not everybody can get it, and
you
some
can
people
pay
who
for
can
it?
get, what's that?
You can pay for it?
You can pay for it. Right now, we have an arrangement that allows us to have some of it in a cost-deferred status. So, the company that we're working with is asking if we can pay for it eventually, and we'll say maybe eventually we'll get some funding, and they've been very patient with us and very good.
But would you know if the Philippine government has the capacity to track what you're tracking?
The Philippine government, so many governments have access to those kinds of things. So the Philippine government, through an arrangement with, for example, this is not a secret, the Canadian government, since in the past year, has given something called dark vessel detection to the Philippine government. And Sea Vision comes from the United States and is a platform that can find a lot of these things. And it doesn't mean that I'm the only one that has it. The advantage that I have is that I don't work for the government, which is funny to say as a person who worked for a government for 35 years. But I don't have anybody in between me and the public. So I didn't have to ask anyone's permission to come on your show today.
Yes, correct.
And if I want to put out a tweet that says this is what I see, I can put it out. And even if the U.S. government or the Philippine government or any government says, I don't like that you did that, they can't stop me because I'm a private
So
citizen.
bottom line, you're not a CIA spy? That's what everyone's been saying on Twitter /X.
And then also, just to put it on the record, you are not being funded by the Philippine government.
No.
Okay.
Not a cent.
Nor the Coast Guard, nor any
Nope.
Philippine
But
military.
you are
assets.
married to a Filipino.
I am. I am.
So in that sense,
So yes,
giving
so
away
I do
secrets
take
here.
orders from a Filipina.
So in that sense, you are kind of under. No. I wanted to come back to the transparency point because you wrote a paper about what you call the Philippines' assertive transparency
Yes.
campaign. Again, as Shawn was pointing out, that has to do with filming and documenting everything that happens at sea, all the encounters, taking journalists on the missions, and so on and so forth. Basically, shining the spotlight
Right.
on what's happening out there and on China's aggressiveness.
Yes.
I have to ask, is it really working? Or is it
Okay.
only serving to
Yeah.
anger Beijing even more?
Good question.
And inflame tensions even more?
Yeah, in fact, that's why we wrote the paper. And so the reason was because certainly the Philippines is taking on risk by shining the light, right? So the question is, what does the Philippines get in return? So what we propose is that the Philippines sets 3 conditions for future success. And it doesn't mean that the Philippines will ultimately succeed in any particular way, but it's certainly these 3 things are happening. One is it is increasing the Philippines' national resilience, which means, for example, there are increased budgets for maritime security. There is increased public awareness. We now see investigations going on in the Senate of various activities that may not have got attention before. There is this entire civilian convoy that goes out is evidence of this national resilience, because you have to have that in a democracy if you're going to have any way to push back. Second is international support. Undeniable at this point. I mean, I just came from Shangri-La. The keynote speaker at the largest, most important national security conference in the entire Asia Pacific, maybe the world, was Ferdinand Marcos. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. They didn't just look out and say it's the Philippines' turn. They chose him because the Philippines has made such a difference. We've seen pledges of support in radars and ships from Japan. We've seen dark vessel detection from Canada. We've seen
Australia, the UK,
exactly,
France.
all of those things. The trilateral summit that happened in the United States and came back with the Luzon Economic Corridor. All of these things didn't happen just because one day everybody woke up and says, Philippines are nice people, we should give them things.
Right.
People say, this is in our security interests to support the Philippines at this point. So all of this is to say that it's not just taking on risk. Now, the third thing, of course, is it's increasing the reputational cost on China. So far, China has seemed pretty willing to put up with that and has, as we said, has escalated in many ways. So the jury is still out on the final result of all this. What we were simply trying to do in putting out our paper is saying it's not just about taking on risk. It's not just about feeling good about yourself that you're finally pushing back. It's about actually getting some benefits in return.
But surely the only benchmark of success that matters is that we avoid war, right?
That's not the
I
only.
mean, you talked about coming
Yeah.
from the Shangri-La dialogue.
Yeah.
You heard what the Chinese Defense Minister, Admiral Dong Jun,
Sure.
there was saying. He was all fired up, right?
Well,
And,
and the reason I'm sort of, it's not only about avoiding war. And if you cast things only in terms of peace or war, then you sort of play right into their hands because they're trying to intimidate you by convincing you that the only outcome of this is war, when actually there are a myriad outcomes.
Okay, really, really quickly, I
Sure.
just really wanted to ask you here, while you were here in the Philippines, in our studio, as we know, I think it's pretty much fact that Vietnam has actually occupied more features than China in the disputed waters, in the disputed territories. What have you noticed about the movements of Vietnamese vehicles, or vessels rather, vis-a-vis the Chinese ones? Are they similar to what's happening between the Philippine-claimed areas?
So no, China has not. So, and this goes back many, many years. So the Philippines has a geographical disadvantage in some ways because so many of these features that are close to the surface of the water are in the Philippines EEZ. So while there are a lot of things that happen in and around Vietnam and Malaysia and others, the majority of the conflict or the confrontation happens in the Philippines EEZ. You have this huge fishing ground at Scarborough Shoal. You have this
The gas
Mischief
deposit,
Reef.
supposedly.
Mischief Reef with a major military base in the Philippines EEZ.
Exactly.
Vietnam doesn't have that. Malaysia doesn't have that. So it's a different kind of problem. So even though Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia handle things differently, they don't have as acute a problem with China as the Philippines
It's closer to us.
Nobody else has a blockade of one of their military
right.
outposts, right? Nobody else has this major fishing ground that is no longer available to their fishermen. So it is a unique problem that the Philippines has. And if you have other Southeast Asian nations wagging their fingers at you saying, you're not as smart as we are because we're better at handling it. Say, okay, tell me what it's like when they start blockading one of your military outposts, and then come back and talk to me.
What's happening in Taiwan, over in Taiwan?
China is increasing pressure in a very similar way. They're using the pretext of different things that happen, like the death of 2 fishermen in February, or the inauguration of another president they don't want, as excuses to sort of gradually keep tightening and tightening. So it is a pressure intimidation campaign.
How are the number of vessels around that area?
I mean, they just held the largest military drills
They just
in the waters of Taiwan.
As far as specific numbers of vessels, I don't quite watch that as closely as I do the Philippines. So.
Which one's the bigger flashpoint at this point, do you think?
I think
it feels like it's a bit of a toss-up.
It depends on how you ask the question. So the issue with Taiwan, of course, is that China has clearly set its objective to absorb Taiwan. Whereas with the Philippines, it's not obvious that anyone is ready to there's no invasion of any particular place that is imminent. What China is seeking to do is get the Philippines to abandon certain outposts or, abandon Ayungin Shoal, abandon Sabina Shoal, those kinds of things. Whereas with Taiwan, they really are having to take an island of 25 million people. That's a much different kind of problem.
We could talk about this with you all night. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. We hope to get you back in the studio another time. Ray Powell, Maritime Security Expert and Director of Sea Light.
And thank you for shedding a
Thank
light.
you so much.
In the dark seas.
My pleasure.
So poetic.
Up next, we'll bring you the highlights of the Senate's closed-door executive session with Bamban Mayor Guo. More details on that when we return. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You are watching the big story here at One News.
Senators conducted the closed-door executive session today as part of their ongoing investigation into Bamban Mayor Guo. Afterwards, Senator Risa Hontiveros, who led the probe, said it convinced lawmakers even more that not only is she involved in pogos, but that she's also not a real Filipino citizen. Ria Fernandez with that story.
Today's executive session at the Senate, which tackled crimes involving pogos in the country, lasted for 4 hours. Representatives of various agencies attended the session, including from the National Security Council, Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission, the Anti-Money Laundering Council or AMLAC, and other security and intelligence service agencies. The session was a closed-door meeting to maintain the confidentiality of the testimonies of invited resource persons. But after the session, Senator Risa Hontiveros, the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Women and Children, said she and other senators became even more convinced that it's time for a nationwide ban on pogos.
Ilang taon na itong problema ang mga pogos mula pa ng panahon ni Duterte. Ang dami-daming masasamang epektong dinulot. Napako yung mga pangako nung simula na na-excite ang iba na magdudulot daw ng economic gains. Di naman nangyari yun.
There have been numerous raids and arrests in the past years of pogo operations and the workers involved. Many of them were found to be Chinese nationals who were also involved in other criminal activities. Also tackled at the executive session was the citizenship of Bamban Mayor Guo and her alleged ties to pogos in her municipality. Though Senator Hontiveros refused to give more details, she said she and other senators have become more convinced that the mayor is not a true Filipino citizen.
Lumalabas ang katotohanan hindi sa bibig ni Mayor Alice Guo at hindi lamang sa aming puspusang investigasyon, pati po sa mga parallel investigation ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno.
Hontiveros also noted that they are looking into social media reports that Guo's father, Angelito Guo, has ties to the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, the ruling party of China. Because of what's been revealed during the executive session, Hontiveros says she hopes the NSC will recommend to President Marcos the eventual shutdown of pogos in the country on the basis they're a national security threat. Though there is already a pending measure at the Senate to ban pogos, Hontiveros says the president can take action now. Mayor Guo was not invited to today's executive session, but through her lawyer, the suspended mayor sent a letter to Senator Hontiveros. Here, she again denied accusations that she is a pogo protector. She insisted that she has nothing to do with murder, prostitution, human trafficking, love scam, money laundering, or any cyber crimes. She also said she hasn't stolen anything.
Hontiveros said she will instead invite Guo in the next public hearing. But before that, she has to meet first the Anti-Money Laundering Council to discuss the illegal revenue flow of Zunyuan into the country. Most especially that two of the former business partners of the mayor are involved in a money laundering scam in Singapore. For News 5, Ria Fernandez, We Are One News.
Spot of bad news. Inflation accelerated for a fourth straight month in May, driven by a faster pace of increase in utility and transport costs. Let's look at the numbers. Inflation clocked in at 3.9% in May, a slight increase from the 3.8% logged in April. The latest inflation print falls within the government's 2 to 4% target band, though, and also within the Bangko Central's projected range of 3.7 to 4.5%. Food inflation slowed for the month of May to 6.1%, down from 6.3% the previous month. And that's because of slower price increases in vegetables. The government continues to keep a close watch on rice prices, especially after the newly imposed tariff cut.
For its outlook, the Bangko Central said that risks to inflation continue to lean toward the upside, with possible further price pressures from higher transport costs, elevated food prices, higher electricity rates, and the increase in global oil prices. Nonetheless, the central bank expects average inflation to return to the target range for full year 2024 and 2025. Checking in on the currency, the Philippine peso continues to sink, hitting a 19-month low for a third consecutive trading day. The local currency closed at 58.78 against the greenback today.
Ouch, is all I can say. We've been talking a lot about artificial intelligence lately, with many companies saying they have begun looking into it. Now, remember, Microsoft also said in a survey that 2024 was the year AI in the workplace gets real. Well, one conglomerate that's putting its money where its mouth is Aboitiz. They've gone and set up a whole separate arm for AI called Aboitiz Data Innovation. And tonight, we're joined by ADI CEO David Hardoon. David, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Coming again, the same thing as I said to Ray. Thanks for braving rainy Manila traffic, rainy weather traffic.
It was fantastic.
It's part of the experience.
Okay, let's set the context here. What is ADI? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So ADI, in short, Aboitiz Data Innovation, was set up to really kind of understand and solve one element in terms of everyone's been talking about data. Everyone's been talking about AI. But how does it, in the end of the day, really help a business? And from what we care about ultimately in terms of customer engagement, revenue opportunities, operational efficiency, P&L effectively. Now, it's a conglomerate. It's a vast organization. So it could be things such as predicting the quality of shrimp. It can be from customer engagement in terms of financial products. If you think about BSP, at the end of the day, there's a massive effort in terms of financial inclusion. How do you do that when you have customers who don't have a historical record in terms of bank accounts? That's AI at the end of the day. And then I'll give you one last example, which I absolutely love, in terms of energy, power, predictive maintenance, making sure that we're mitigating brownouts and making sure there's stability.
Are any power plants here using that? Because
Yes.
we just had a brownout earlier and I had to reset the breaker.
Well, that's one of the things that we're rolling out right now. We just had an announcement a few days ago about Project Archangel, which essentially is creating the first smart power plant with a digital twin. So that will be coming up very soon. And essentially, if you think about it, we want to make sure that we're creating immense amounts of data assets. We're collecting data. But are we using it? Are we truly putting it into practice where it's relevant? There are many times situations where you don't really need it. But there are plenty of aspects whereby it can make a genuine difference. It can make a astronomical value both as a consumer. I mean, we all have the ability of ordering food at home. Or from a business perspective in terms of how do we create those profits and opportunities, or as I mentioned, those savings. That's why we were created. And for the first 2 years of existence, we have been exclusively focusing on our businesses, validating it for ourselves. And for the last year, we've been going out and demonstrating that other organizations, leveraging our help, of course, can achieve it. And then recently, across Southeast Asia.
How expensive is it to integrate? For example, I own a coal power plant. I'm not yet done. I'm still stuck on that example.
You own a coal power
I
plant?
don't, but I
Damn,
wish
girl.
I did because I might actually try to make sure that it's operating properly and preventively maintained. If, for example, it's an old plant, maybe from the 80s or whatever, can I still engage your services and
How does AI come into the picture?
yeah, and how can you insert it into an old mammoth of a factory?
So I want to kind of tease that down because, and in fact, that's one of the reasons I still do what I do and I'm fascinated about it, is you'll find that if you ask companies, are you doing AI? I would state that the vast majorities of them would say yes. However, if you ask them, are you using it on a day-to-day basis? Are you making decisions? Is it operational? They'll go, well, it's still experimentation. It's still a pilot. It's still a sandbox. So the thing that we've been focusing on, and I'll get to that aspect of the question, is how do we make it real? Now, what you find is, while there is a lot of emphasis and focus in terms of data, collecting it, putting the environments in place, using it, but there's also the aspect of the process. Does the engineer know how to use the information? How do they translate it? Is there a change in where things need to be done, and so forth? So you need to look at it holistically.
Right.
Why am I presenting that way is wise woman in my life, my mother, you don't boil the ocean to make a cup of tea. So you don't start and saying, okay, we're going to do that. No, we step by step. I would argue that you already have a lot of sensors in place because a lot of equipments come with it. Are you using it? Are you collecting it? If you don't have those sensors, you may need to put them in place, step by step by step by step, as well as realizing if actually you maybe want to replace the whole machine altogether.
Have you had to place engineers who understand AI and data across different businesses to be able to operationalize the technologies?
Yes. And that's exactly that bridge. It's not just about the AI technical data element. It's also about understanding the domain. So one of the things that kind of makes us, I would argue, slightly different is that we're not just service providers and techies, which many times I refer to me as myself as one, or geek. We're also operators. So for example, if we're talking about power, we have people on board that have been doing power for 20, 25 years. They will talk about boilers until your ears fall off.
Right.
I'm an ex-regulator. So when we're thinking about an application of AI in financial crimes, what does that then mean to a fraud investigator? What does it mean from a regulatory perspective? It's bridging those two worlds. And once you do that, you realize two things. It's actually not that complicated. It can be done. It's not that
So it's
expensive.
more of upskilling rather than hiring people from outside?
Bingo. It's about, there may be, if you want to accelerate it, you may want to bring one or two or a few more people from outside, but fundamentally it's about upskilling.
You talked about validating the concept internally first
Yes.
within the Aboitiz Group businesses before you roll it out. What lessons did you take away from that?
Well, patience. I think that's number one. And also an identification of, think of it as a bit of the recipe. I'll give you a very, very simple example. especially now with AI, I don't like using the word a hype, but sometimes it can be. You want to jump in, you want to do, you enter conversations. David, how can you use AI?
Right.
That is the wrong question. However exciting it may be, unless you're a research agency, the question should be, we're trying to reach a broader audience. How can we do that? Well, I'm pretty sure we can actually use AI to achieve that. As I mentioned, finance. We want to be able to onboard and provide credit to customers who are thin file, no file, meaning they have no history. How do we do that? I'm pretty sure we can find AI solutions to a job. So it's the approach in which the engagement. Second one, to the point that you've mentioned of, how do we make sure we're also upskilling the people? Because at the end of the day, they need to use it. We need to make sure it's sustainable. And then finally, the cost. And I was reading something in terms of the Philippines' readiness to do AI. I would actually argue Philippines is more than ready. I can share a bit of stories. I don't know if you remember SAS. It used to be one of the first softwares of data analytics.
Yes.
Yeah.
The very first place that they've actually created relationships with university outside of the US was Philippines. And we're talking about several decades now. So there are a lot of skill sets. But now the question specifically in Philippines is the willingness.
Right.
We're doing it, others are starting, but what we need more is more willingness to explore and see the possibilities.
You're absolutely right. Sorry to reference another company, but we just had Microsoft as well as a guest, and they did a whole survey and found that yes, executives are, they're keen, they're looking into it. The vast majority say they're interested in integrating it, but it's a bit slow. Where do you think the reticence is coming from? Is it the cost? Is it just because the technology is so new, people are wait and see mode? Where is this coming from? Or
The
is that
boomers.
just
Is it coming from the boomers who are still in the C-suite? It could be.
Well, I think sometimes, well, perhaps their younger kids and generation are kind of nudging them, like, why are you still doing it like that?
Yeah.
But I think the renaissance and is really coming from, seeing is believing. And what you're finding now is that there are so many actual cases out there. I mean, when you engage ChatGPT, when you're seeing Sona, when it's actually creating video, doesn't matter how or much of a disbeliever you are, you have to go like, this is phenomenal, this is fantastic. So that's also the approach that we've been taking. And in fact, one of the things that we've been doing over the last 3 years, in fact 4 years, because this really was incubated in the bank, Union Bank of the Philippines, is we've been very public about it. And the reason we were very public about it is because we wanted to look at what we're doing. It may not be applicable to you for one, but if we're willing to take the risk and it's successful for us, try as well. And if it wasn't successful for us, learn.
Help
In
us
your
believe.
experience,
Help us.
in your experience, to tie into what you, I think, is going to ask. In your experience here, at least with Philippine companies outside the Aboitiz group, how willing are these companies? And can you tell us if they're big, medium, or mostly I guess majority of Philippine companies fall under MSME?
So we've really been having a fantastic series of conversations. And there isn't even a uniform to it. It's from even other conglomerates that we've been working with. I'm a big believer of frenemies, if I use that kind of joking term, to government agencies, to smaller startups. We've been talking to all of them. It's really the question of the entry point. And that's why I mentioned it's really, really important to go, how can it be this relevant to you? How can this be relevant? And then what's the aspect of starting? Is the starting point training? Is the starting point looking into your system and your architecture? Is the starting point just doing a proof of concept, but thinking of already the process of, if this is successful, how it be used? Let me give you another, if I may, example.
We love examples here.
One of our businesses, which is our cement group, I still remember it. We said, okay, how can we use AI? How can we help them process? So when we sat down back then with the CEO of the time, he said, David, one of the challenges I have in terms of the process, just to share very briefly, and by the way, cement is the second most used substance outside of water, is they make many, many, many samples, wait 28 days, and destroy it. Because it's extremely important to know what's the strength of cement. AI, in the end of the day, is simply the capacity to find a pattern. Et voila. Long story short, ability to predict what is a compressive strength in advance. 50% reduction in energy.
Wow.
Reduction in wastage. Quantifiably measuring 35 kilotons reduction in CO2 emissions.
Nice.
I was going to say that hits the environmental targets as well.
Amazing.
And I will be honest enough to say we didn't even start thinking about that. We really were thinking about the money, how much we can save on
So
doing
how much have you saved?
We've saved in the 7 digits. It really was significant. In fact, it's deployed and operational in all the manufacturing plants right now. AI data, when done right, and I know that's a bit of a loaded statement, but when done right, pays for itself. Because how can you not do better when you know more? AI is about knowing more.
Knowledge is power.
If I'm a new business, where do I start? I mean, you talked about starting points.
Yeah.
Does it differ from a business to the other? Is it all about convincing, for one, my superiors, the funders, the investors to invest in this technology? Is that the first case that you need to solve?
I would perhaps start one step before. The first step before is, and arguably,
The first step is to call David.
Right?
yes,
David, I need your help.
it's, well, what's the business objective? What is it that you're trying to do? And again, it could be as simple as the boss is requiring me to increase my revenue or my sales target by 50%, by 5%, compress literally what is that underlying objective. Second question is, have we been collecting data? Have we been storing it? Have we not? Because why that becomes really important is because if you don't really know what you're trying to achieve, I would kind of say don't even go down that path of AI. Focus on what is it that you're trying to achieve. Second question, which will impact the investment of, is there data? You know what? Don't even worry about how much. Is there? That then results to the ability of saying, okay, if I'm able to achieve a 10% improvement, I will save this much. You see what you've done now? You literally know if it's going to cost me $1, but I can make 5, it pays for itself. If I'm going to only make half a centavo, but it's going to cost me 1, you know what? Maybe it's not worthwhile. That is the underlying secret. And once you do it, that's why I mentioned it becomes a bit more obvious. It's still difficult, it's still convincing, but it becomes easier.
Right.
When he talks about it, it becomes so simple.
I mean, that's
So
why.
I told you, call David. Talking about what you're trying to achieve, ADI is trying to be ambitious about this whole thing.
Yeah.
You're not just targeting the Philippines
No.
market. You're targeting all of Southeast Asia. Give us a better sense of what the AI race is looking like in ASEAN and where the Philippines stands.
So one of the exciting things that I really believe Philippines has almost I would argue an edge, even over countries like Singapore, who is technologically has been adopting AI for quite some time, is that there's the opportunities here. Real opportunities with very quantifiable value. Like I mentioned in terms of cement, I didn't even talk about the shrimps, we have stuff across the board. Those are the real examples. As I mentioned, the challenge of making it real is not unique to Philippines. Everyone has the exact same problem. Well, and that's what we've been finding. When we're talking to companies, financial institutions, power companies across the board, that's exactly what they're asking us in terms of, well, how did you make it real? Can you help us accelerate? Can we minimize the risk? Suddenly we're in a position whereby Philippines is exporting the know-how to deploy
Because there are
AI.
applications already here.
Exactly.
What are digital twins?
So a digital twin, and this is a really fun thing, is effectively replicating anything. It could be literally from a studio, from a person, if you're looking at medical, it could be a power plant, digitally, down to the minute detail. Why? So that then if you're able to monitor it, you don't have to be physically in the plant. You can digitally review it, identify if there's an issue, all the way. One wonderful example is you could zoom into a 1 millimeter pipe in a center of a plant because it's been replicated. So now your ability to oversee, understand, and operate becomes, well,
Does it
that's
adjust
enormous.
real time?
That's the goal. That's the objective.
But David, let's talk about like setting up that virtual model or the digital twin. Do you need like the blueprints, especially like here in the Philippines? Sometimes you have blueprints, but you realize the ducting for the air conditioning units were never in the blueprints to begin with. Do you use LiDAR or any other sort of tool?
Exactly. That's why many times it isn't the AI, it isn't the data. It's the process. It's the alignment with what you think and what it is. And in fact, at times what you find is that is really the investment. I mean, I don't want to throw more jargons, but there's something known as technical debt, whereby you kind of have to, like you just said right now, realize, oh, actually the duct is not where we thought it is. That's the technical debt to update your blueprints. It is extremely important, but again, it's a worthwhile investment.
It is.
I want to give you one more example, if I may, which is one of the things of exports out of the Philippines that we've been doing as well, and where it can also help people, us. One of the projects we're working on, it's not deployed yet, but one of the projects we're working on, we call it Project Salvation. We're using satellite information, geospatial, topological information, weather, to predict landslides.
Wow.
Now, having that ability to be able to identify a risk of landslide before it occurs, from an equipment point of view, from a planning perspective, and more so from saving lives.
Right, right.
Now-
Also forms part of the climate smart agriculture
Exactly.
space. Right?
So AI can be used in elements of, as I mentioned, from a revenue all the way to genuinely saving
Can we
lives.
do that in the West Philippine Sea?
I knew she was going to ask that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because she is producing a documentary on the West Philippine Sea, so I knew she was going to ask that.
As long as there are patents.
And data.
Okay.
And data.
We are going to have to leave that there. Good to hear that the key
you.
message is that there are plenty of opportunities. AI is not a threat. Thank you so much for your time today. David Hardoon, CEO of Aboitiz Data Innovation.
All right, just some good news before we go, because I really love ending Wednesdays on a good note, especially rainy ones. Quick reminder that June 17 has been declared a regular holiday in observance of the Islamic Feast of Sacrifice, or Eid al-Adha. And that is our big picture tonight. The Eid al-Adha is one of the two major holidays for Muslims. It falls on the 10th day of the final month in the Islamic lunar calendar. Eid al-Adha commemorates the willingness of Ibrahim, or if you're Christian, Abraham, to sacrifice his son as God commanded. The Islamic holiday is usually lasts for 3 days and is marked with prayers and family gatherings.
June 17th is the day.
There won't be traffic for you going to work because it's a holiday.
For all of us, because we still have to work.
Right.
We still have to put out the news.
But there won't be traffic. Because I'm really insistent that we're going to end this on a good note.
Oh, that's true.
All right, that's it from the big story tonight.
Can you predict traffic?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God! He's predicting yes tonight.
We should have you all the time here. We are one news
You
outside.
should try to fix traffic first.
Oh.
That would be a good
might
proof
not
of
be able to
concept.
And then we can adopt you as a full-fledged Filipino.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.